We'll move to item number 5, introduced for first reading ordinance 768, amending chapter 16.36, quote-unquote, final map of Title 16 of the Patterson Municipal Code. So over to Mr. Butler.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Molina, members of the council. Before we get to our main attraction tonight, which is the downtown visioning interviews, we had a quick and time-sensitive item that we had to add to the agenda in light of an opportunity that has come to Patterson over the last week or so. This is going to be frustrating, I know, because there's very little that I can say in detail about it, but there is a large distribution fulfillment center project that the city has the potential to be the new home for. 1.5 million square feet, and that's about all we can say right now about the details. The time sensitivity of it is that, or comes because this project has been targeted for another city in our region, and the company got far along into the planning process with that other city. They have now, for a variety of reasons, decided to look at other options, including Patterson, but their timeline has not changed. They're under the same timeline to get this project built and completed and up and running for operations. So we've been presented with the opportunity, and we believe that we have a very strong chance of getting it if we can, honor the timelines or perform on the timelines that the development company has committed to the end user. That is the reason for the ordinance change that's before you tonight. It has to do with authorizing staff to actually sign off on the final map for this project. I'm going to ask Joel Andrews to talk a little bit about specifically what it means in terms of the change, and then the discussion that happened at the Planning Commission last night. There was a special Planning Commission last night, again, because of the time sensitivity of it all, and he can talk about what the discussion was there and what their recommendation to the council was. And of course, we have Steve Churchwell here as well to answer any legal questions that may come up. Joel?
Mayor and council members, in the second half of this year, city staff is planning to present the council with recommended changes to the subdivision ordinance. This section of the municipal code outlines measures related to dividing pieces of land and changing lot lines. The item before you tonight would have been in part of that those proposed changes, but it's coming before you tonight because, as Rod said, we have a potential industrial project the city's competing for. It's on a tight frame, and the city's ability to process the project on a shorter time frame may make the difference between whether that company selects Patterson or not. The proposed ordinance would allow final maps to be approved at the staff level. First, I need to provide some background on the mapping process. Dividing land is basically a two-step process. The first step, you go through one of two procedures, is either to use a parcel map, which typically involves smaller numbers of lots, or a subdivision map, which is used to create a lot of lots. Usually applications to divide land are made at the same time as other developments proposed. So a residential housing project or an industrial project would be a good example. The Planning Commission is the deciding body for parcel maps, and the City Council is the deciding body for subdivision maps. And all conditions of approval, all the changes that happen are made at that stage. The second step of the process is the final map, which makes the division of those lots official. The final map includes all the easements, the right-of-way dedications, and lot line information. And these documents are circulated to appropriate city departments, typically planning, engineering, and public works, although others may be included to ensure consistency with what was previously approved and to ensure that all conditions of approval that were placed on the project are completed that were tied to the final map. Finally, the final map is noticed for a city council agenda. They're typically placed on the consent agenda. The council's approval has become somewhat perfunctory since the only decision the council is being asked to make is the final map consistent with what was approved with the parcel map or the subdivision map. No changes to the map or conditions of approval can be made at that time. So it's either consistent with what was approved or it's not. So in order to streamline processes and be more competitive, the proposed ordinance includes language that would allow the city planning director and city manager to approve or disapprove a final map. The ordinance requires that the council be notified of the potential for action, and decisions may be appealed to the city council. It's not staff's intent to make this a common practice. We would only use this in a rare competitive circumstance where the amount of time needed to process a project are crucial, and this would never be used on residential projects. When not used, final maps would still come before the city council for approval. There's also a provision included in the ordinance that requires review of this delegation of authority every 3 years and may be reconsidered at any time by the city council. The Planning Commission recommended approval of this ordinance with a 3-1 vote. The dissenting commissioner asked that the city engineer, public works director, and fire chief be required to sign off as well. However, it was noted that the city engineer already physically signs the document showing his approval, and the public works director already is included in part of the review and must okay the final map before it's allowed to move forward. Staff is recommending that the council open a public hearing, consider the issues, and approve the first reading and introduction of the ordinance. That concludes my report.
Questions from council?
I request that it either be tabled or moved to be considered following the interviews. I have quite a few questions about this, and I was under the impression that the entire meeting was to be devoted to the interviewing of the visioning firms. And I don't want to take time away from those interviews.
Thank you for sharing that, Councilmember Lusgar, and I kind of had the same sentiment. I'm not sure how far we're going to go in this particular item, but if we had not made a decision by 6:25 sharp, and I mean sharp, I would strongly suggest that we would table this to a subsequent meeting because, as Councilmember Lusgar mentioned, we had promised these firms our full undivided attention and time. And I certainly don't want to have them interview when they have traveled a good distance and us have listened to them at an ungodly hour. It's just not right. I still haven't really heard the true nexus and required connection between this potential project and changing this ordinance midstream in an instant. I realize there are sensitive matters, but this council has always been very business friendly, and we have always made strong accommodations almost at an instant to make sure that not only the project proponent is benefited, but the city is certainly going to provide that economic benefit as well. I would just hope that we would give sensitivity to those tonight, though, and the real reason, which is why we're here for the interview process. Thank you.
Councilmember Biener.
I don't think it's take too long. We've had some good presentations. Are we going to see if there's any public that wants to speak on
I
this?
want to see if council will open up public hearing.
Okay, I think this is as important as the rest of what we're doing here. There's a lot of jobs involved here. But go ahead and open it up to the public.
I'm absolutely in favor of opening up the public discussion. I think part of our job up here is things happen on a whim, and we have to be open to hear items as they come up. I appreciate that last night that the Planning Commission had an emergency meeting, so to speak, and they came and they gathered, and so I appreciate that. So I'm in favor of opening up the public hearing.
My only question, Mr. Andrews, you said it was a 3-1 vote?
That's right.
Was there an absent commissioner?
There was one absent,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Well, just in light of the comments, I too will be in favor of opening the public hearing. And so at this time, there's a public hearing is open, opportunity to comment. Please state your name and your address, please.
Thank you. I'm Max Garcia with GDR Engineering, also from out of town, so I'm glad you opened it because I would rather go home myself. This is an item that I think is long overdue. I think I'll try to make it a little bit more clear on a layman's terms what you're really doing tonight, because you're one of the few, probably the only council that I'm aware of that final maps still go to. because your maps are approved at the tentative map stage. That's where you approve or deny a map or whatever and put conditions on it. And then the map, after it's all worked and put together by people like our firm, it comes to the city engineer, which by the MAP Act, he has to make sure that it's in substantial conformance with the MAP Act. And if he does, then the map is basically approved. I've been in business since 1978, never seen a final map denied after it's been determined substantially in compliance. The reason the maps now have to come to you is because you haven't authorized anybody at staff level to sign the map when it records for the acceptance of easements and roadway dedications that are being required on the tentative map. There's been a couple maps that got approved, that got recorded, and the city clerk knows that we had to come back and write legal descriptions, go through staff, get them reviewed, then record them, because there was no method of transferring those easements and dedications because you hadn't authorized the city engineer or city manager to accept those on your behalf. So that's why the maps are really coming to you, because the approval is at the tentative map. We've been talking to the city for years to do this. The hesitance was because you didn't have your own city engineer, because your map were basically being approved by an outside firm. But now that you have your own city engineer, I think you need to get up with times like the other communities have. I'm also involved in this project that's really time sensitive, and that's the main reason that we're pushing to get this action done now, because we have to have it, or we could possibly lose something that's super valuable to the city. And I'm just like your city manager, I can only tell you so much. But I don't think this is something that would just be a one-time deal. I think you need to, this is what all the other communities are doing. And the reason, it saves staff time. After you find a map is in conformance, now they have to prepare a staff report, put it on the agenda, bring it to you as a formality. You couldn't deny it if you wanted to, because if you tried, you'd be sued, because it was in conformance with the tentative map. So all you're doing is taking action because of the signature that's required. And that's what I'm saying, is that's what you're doing tonight, is authorizing somebody to sign the map so that the easements and dedications that were required on the tentative map can be accepted by the city. And that's what all the other communities have done.
In order for this, mystery project to have a little bit more competitive edge, does the would-be tenant or a certain entity require that this particular project's final map is approved?
Well, the map will be in conformance to a tentative map that's already approved.
Okay.
But the thing is, it doesn't have to sit, as soon as your city engineer says, yes, it's in conformance, it can record the next day.
Okay. I guess
and that's how we meet the schedule. It doesn't have to wait until you have a special meeting or.
Well, and the same is true if we approve it as a city council. It can be done the same day as well.
Yeah,
right?
but we have to schedule a meeting,
Okay.
and you have to notice it, and there's time involved. And again, the point I'm getting across is you've created staff time to prepare the staff report and whatever. If you're really trying to find ways to streamline your staff and save time, this is a perfect one, like everybody else has done.
Is the final map for this particular project, ready to go and finished?
The tentative map's approved.
Okay.
The right now is where all the action's going, and I can't really go into much more detail, but the thing is, as soon as we have that map ready to record, well, we've got to give a date.
Okay.
That
I
meets
guess,
their schedule.
in spirit, in concept, I'm not too, I'm not against it, but it's just, applying that particular situation in all instances without it kind of going to the council, in that 1 in 10,000 chance there could be a problem. As I said before, I think this council and staff have been pretty agreeable and accommodating and coming up with a meeting, within 48 hours, for 72 hours if need be. Personally, I'm kind of torn. I see both sides. I just didn't want it to be problematic for the council, if any.
No, and enough I thought, because I work in a lot of communities, and you guys know me, I've worked in this community for many years. We were actually your city engineers for several years. All I'm trying to do is tell you this is a kind of a house cleaning matter more than it is anything else. I wish you'd had a chance to talk to City of Modesto or Ceres or Houston or whatever other town in a county you'd want to call. You'd find out this is something they've done many years ago. We've tried several times, but again, and the city clerk knows the problems we've had with with maps that got kicked back when they tried to record them, especially parcel maps, without having you accept those dedications. And this is kind of a cleanup thing, and it's just going to make it streamlined. It's going to save your staff time, and and if they find the map's not in compliance, it's not going to go anywhere.
For a question for the city attorney, I'm wondering, can we make an exception or make a special condition? I think that's a better way of putting it, where we could go forward with this particular one. But the problem is we don't have a map before us, so we really can't approve a final map, and I think that's part of the catch here. That's part of the stickiness that's not quite making this
Can't we
idea
just
flow.
make a condition that staff can approve it for this time only?
Unfortunately, that will not work because we have to have an ordinance to allow that to happen. It's not a conditional.
Okay.
I mean, if only, right, it would be nice, but that's been explored and it won't do it.
Even if the council wanted to consider this to the subsequent meeting on the 15th, is their final map ready to go so we can, approve it? And I think that's part of the hiccup here. I mean, if they're ready to go and, things are hopping and things are ready to roll, let's see it and we'll give it our blessing.
Yeah, Tuesday.
I think what I'm hearing here, once a tentative map gets this far along, it's either right and we have to pass it, or it's wrong and they don't even get to us. We don't want to get in a situation where we get sued, and we do want to streamline into the 20th century, you could say, like most cities have, to get some of this done and lighten up the load on our staff and even on our council for that matter. And I don't know what this project is. I could narrow it down and probably guess. And I thought Patterson had lost it, but I'm glad to hear they're still in the running. And I think we need to pass this.
I've never heard of that the council approval of final maps to be a major hindrance to development projects. Can you cite any examples where the council approval of a final map or a delay associated with the council's approval of a final map had an adverse impact on that development?
I cannot, but it doesn't get to the point that for this project, solving this issue helps the project move forward.
How
and
specifically?
helps us meet that timeline.
I understand that. How specifically would the city council and public be notified of a final map being received for review?
You want to deal with that one, Joel?
So,
I could answer that. That's your tentative map stage.
That's an answer for Joel.
So related to the final map, the city manager and planning director notifying the council about that, we would place notices around the city. We'd also be most likely through email or a phone call contacting you and letting you know this is what's going on.
So would it be part of the council agenda?
So this would not, it is around a council meeting though, so
No verbal report, no consent item?
no.
How would we know?
We would inform you.
Well, it would be the tentative map stage would hear about it.
How would that happen?
Rod, can you help him out, please?
Yeah, I think one thing that we could do in the monthly reports is, include information on any maps that have been approved at the staff level. I think you're all pretty good at.
Don't we
reviewing
usually
those.
approve the final map as part of the process for council approval of overall development agreements?
No, that happens at the tentative map phase. Can't think of the term. Any choices that you have on development or happen at the tentative map stage, the final map is this consistent with the tentative map?
So before we continue, more questions from council. With all due respect, I want to see if any other public, this is a public hearing and it is open, wanted to further comment on this particular item. Seeing none, hearing none, I'll go ahead and bring it back to council. Close the public hearing.
Two things. We're already into 6:37 according to my watch. This could go on for another half hour because it sounds as if we may have a split council. And I really, I'll say it again, I really don't want to be fair to the firms here. There's no reason why we couldn't have scheduled this to a special Thursday or Friday session or into next week. If 48 hours is 72, so 48 hours, whatever the number you want to pick, is really going to kill a project, I think there's something else going on here that more than meets the eye. I don't know why we had to have this item on tonight.
I agree.
Staff, the council knew of this meeting well in advance. Staff knew this meeting well in advance. Members of the audience, I'm sure, did. And obviously, we have the representatives here, which we promised our full attention. And we're circumventing that now.
I didn't get my packet until Friday night, and I really don't like passing these things last minute, quickly, fast, without doing our due diligence. As Councilmember Beener said, we need to be careful that we don't find ourselves in a situation where there's litigation involved. We've had too much of it recently. As a matter of fact, at our last meeting, we reported out about litigation because of problems with developmental agreements. So I think it's really imperative that this council looks very seriously about putting forward, giving up our oversight, more oversight to staff when we haven't even begun to get into control some of our litigation that's going on because of the developmental agreements that had problems in the first place. So before we start giving more up, I think we need to get that in check too.
I think
It's not about the development agreements. This is only about the finishing the final map that's already have been approved on the tentative map. I think we got a competent staff, probably knows a lot more than we do in the technical part of something like this. And if most of the other cities are doing it, I think we need to follow along. And we have had this for 4 days. I mean, we read this, so I'd like to move to.
With all due
to
respect,
pass this.
Councilmember Beener, other cities also collect charges for their employees, and we've had that discussion, and not everybody's in agreement with that either. We're a different city. We make our own rules. We make our own ordinances. And I think we need to look very clearly and very long at how we do our developmental agreements. We just sent over $1.3 million out the door on Friday, or on our last meeting on Tuesday, because of developmental agreement problems and because of staff errors, possibly old council errors, and possibly planning commission errors as well. And so we need to be very diligent about making sure how we move forward with developmental agreements. Fast or not, it's important. We spent too much.
Councilmember, this is not a developmental agreement. Do you know what a development agreement is?
I do, but it's
This
part.
is not a developmental
It
agreement.
will
This is
be.
separate-
It will
separate
be.
from that.
It
This
will
is-
be.
okay.
It's part of it.
This is
Point of-
not a
point of
developmental
order.
agreement.
Just point of order, okay?
Um,
So,
This is-
excuse me, Councilmember Beener, just clarification. So this is a process, right? There's a couple of letters in this language that I think provide the council the authority to check. There's the checks and balances here. The city manager and the planning director. Mr. Andrews, just repeat for me that at least the dissenting member last night mentioned that potentially they wanted to see the city engineer, the fire chief and public works director sign off on this as well?
That's it, right.
Okay, so it's not in here, and I'm going to ask the city manager and probably the plan director. So when we look at items, I'm not certain that just you and Mr. Andrews sit in the room and say, thumbs up, this looks good. I mean, that's what the rest of the staff is there for. That's correct?
That's correct. And yeah, that goes through a review process that involves virtually every department. We would also, I know there was some discussion last night. I've heard some suggestions from individual council members throughout the day today about maybe changing the mix of staff who sign off, and we're open to that discussion. And I think we can make some changes tonight that are minor enough to move things forward to a second reading on this ordinance. So if, for example, there was a desire to include city engineer or public works director as part of that.
Can I have opportunity to speak tonight? I haven't yet on this,
Sure,
so
go
I
ahead.
would
Go ahead.
appreciate
And,
my
and I'm
council
not
members.
finished either with my question.
Got it.
Duly noted. Can I speak now?
Sure.
Thank you. All right. So this is not a developmental agreement. What we are talking about here is simply what I know you by Max. I'm
Garcia.
sorry. Yes, thank you. Was referring to is by the letter by California law, okay, is the Subdivision Act, okay? And so that comes down from the state, all right? And then we have the tentative map, the vesting map, which we have already, when the vesting map comes before the council, the tentative map comes before the council, okay? And what we do is then we have the conditions of approval for that. That is what this council approves, is the conditions of approval for those tentative vesting maps, okay? So
I understand.
You need to let me finish, please. I let you speak, please let me speak.
Continue.
Okay, so once this council, and this council has been very diligent at going over these maps, okay, and from what I can see so far, and then meeting the conditions of approval, all right? So once it goes for the conditions of approval, then it goes, and now you have to have the land surveyor come out and approve these maps. I know I spoke with Mr. Butler this afternoon because I agree, and I actually have on my sheet here for me to look at approving this. I would like to change the language in the ordinance to delete the word city planning director, because officially we don't have a city planning director, so to speak. Joel's title is city planner, right? So, but I think it's important, and I would agree with the comments last night, I would agree with the mayor that now what we have on staff is that we have Mr. Irwin on staff, a city engineer, all right? So the city was doing its due diligence prior in bringing it back and having it, most of these, and I would remind my council members that most of these items are brought before us on the consent calendar, and rarely, and I don't even know if there was an instance where it was actually brought up on the regular agenda. And it, as Mr. Garcia was saying, is that once it gets to the point for getting past and having all the signatures on it, and if all those signatures are on it and everything isn't approved, we can't legally disapprove it. Correct?
That's right.
So that is, essentially, it is a formality, right? And and as Joel was stating earlier, that we were looking at doing this later in the year. However, this instance has come up where we have an opportunity for economic growth for the city, where we have an opportunity for more tax revenue for the city. We are growing, and we are going through growing pains. And if one of the growing pains that we're going through tonight is putting you guys off for a little bit, I apologize. It was nothing that any of us could foresee, but I apologize. But we do have growing pains, and these are part of them. And making decisions that help grow our city is something that we need to look at and not continually procrastinate at. You know, we're already having 3 meetings a month. We were originally slated for 2, now we're going to 3, right? So I don't see a problem with this. I would recommend that we, as I stated earlier, and I would look to Mr. Churchill on this and see what he would think for deleting the word city planning director and inserting the word city engineer. And I know, and I'm open for further discussion, as putting in fire chief.
Well, I mentioned that because I heard that about last night's meeting. Whether it's a formal or not, just the public consumption, the council's that takes place. It's not a couple of people saying, it's good, let's move it forward. I think we have a competent staff. I do want to make clear, and I would agree with Mayor Pro Temp Lustgarten, we have to pay attention, and I think we have. I think Mr. Garcia referred to this as a cleanup process. It's something that we've been doing for quite some time now, whether it's past councils, administrations, et cetera, that particular resolution we came to, about $1.3 million, was something that has been going on for a decade. So, again, it's part of the process. This particular process, my question is, Mr. Churchwell, in letter E in this particular ordinance change, in the second line, after planning director and city manager, every 3 years from the effective date of this ordinance or as soon as thereafter as is practical. Would it change a whole lot if we put 1 year instead of 3 years?
No, that's a decision for the council to make. You can make it as often as you like for that review.
This feels like a proposed solution for something which really hasn't been a problem. I think our city has been more than fair and generous when it comes to considering these types of things. So how would the public be able to weigh in on a final map under this ordinance?
At the tentative map time.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
Correct.
early
Which has already been,
process.
according to Mr. Garcia, has already been approved.
I wanted to ask, and it may be a loaded question, but if we did go ahead with this, or at least there was a majority vote, are there any pitfalls to establishing this? That
The ordinance only speaks to notifying the public, but doesn't specify how they could provide that input. And if the timing associated with the final map approval has become an issue, I would prefer that we have, that we modify the ordinance to put in a more specific time frame for council to approve the map process, rather than delegating that responsibility to staff. When all said is done, we, the council, not the staff, are the ones who are accountable to the public and for the tax dollars that are spent when we make mistakes, especially when it comes to development projects. And I'm not comfortable delegating a major responsibility to staff when it comes to these kind of projects, not at this time.
I was going to ask a couple minutes before, would it be possible, and I know it'd probably be a burden on staff, but if we if it's too late for a Thursday, maybe a Friday meeting. I know there's a time-sensitive issue. I just don't know where the votes lie here.
I think we already got 3 meetings this month or more.
Just Councilmember, Farina, excuse me. Just to clarify, when you say if there's, I'm not sure the wording you used, but
Okay.
were you talking about exposure in terms of risk?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
I just want to clarify. So,
Yeah, and that question was posed to the city attorney.
sure, I just want clarification.
When I mentioned that,
Mr. Bina, we got an answer coming from the attorney, and then we'll go to you.
So, Councilmember Farina, could you ask that one more time?
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
If there was a majority vote for this proposal, and assuming this idea goes through, would there be any potential pitfalls, whether they're common or maybe 1 in 10,000? Because we even have to consider that type of, risk. Would there be any pitfall for this process going through for the council?
Well, you're talking to somebody who started out of law school as a land use litigator in 1982. So I've seen a lot. You say you're 1 in 10,000. I've seen a lot of 1 in 10,000s. Having said that, I was trying when you were first talking about this tonight, I could not recall a single final map that I've ever seen not on consent. I was trying to think of one
Right.
instance, and I couldn't think of one, right? And I'm talking some knockdown, drag-out battles in the coastal zone that I was involved in, in Malibu and some of these places. I mean, so it really is whether I think that the council, and remember, this is first reading tonight. Let's not lose sight of that, right? This will come back.
Okay.
This very thing will come back next week. So it really is about, you had contract staff for a lot of these things, and now you've got in-house staff because you're larger. And it really is a policy call. I mean, even though final map approval is really just making sure the Ts are crossed and the Is are dotted, it is some waypoint, right? So it's whether you would like to, give a little bit of your discretion and delegate that to staff, whether you trust them. And remember, it gives the staff the option to give it to you, right, if there isn't a hurry. They still maintain the authority to go under 050 council action or 060 city staff action. And B of city staff action has all the notice provisions, right, in that part. So, again, being informed by those, I can't believe I'm saying this, 32 years of practicing law, seems like only yesterday. This is one, as someone else said, the Subdivision Map Act, just like everything in California, is something you guys have to run that belt line, right? It's not everything. It's just one thing. As the staff said, when you split a lot at all, you've got to comply with that entire, that just entire statute. And the final map approval is something, unless you delegate it, which, as the gentleman from the public said, a lot of cities are now, because of that competition that's out there for these big projects, saving those 3 days, and I'm just going to tell you, really you guys are all right about this. It's not a huge time savings. It could be 3 days. It could be just, whatever. So that's correct. But is 3 days, I don't know the specifics, right? And you guys are going to be involved in competition with a lot of surrounding communities. Is that 3 days going to cost you? I don't know, right? I can't say that right now. So this at least gives you, in my view, it gives you some options, right? And the council is going to, again, you got a review period of 3 years, which has been mentioned for how is this working out? Do you want to make it shorter, right? And so anyway, hopefully that answers your question to some degree.
Thank you.
The council can pull any agenda, anything on consent for discussion, and so can the public. So
That's right.
Just because it's on consent doesn't mean that it can't be discussed.
That's right.
When I mentioned potential litigation,
Thank you for clarifying.
I was trying to
After
stay
3 years, I didn't know what consent was.
I was trying to stay away, in this case, I was trying to stay away from potential litigation, not bringing more on. As far as that $1.3 million went on for years, the city inherited that from the county, and we had to clean up their mess, is how that part ended up. But anyway, back to this, I had firsthand experience on the timeline with Amazon, as a lot of you know. And another week or a month, Amazon wouldn't be here. Them companies, they have a timeline to stay on, and even after it was okay, they spend a lot of money to stay on time, and that's huge to them. And things are so competitive nowadays. I mean, if we don't want the jobs, we don't need things like this, but we desperately need the revenue stream into the city. Our expenses have went up, and we need the jobs and the revenue. And I move that we pass this. It has nothing to do with DAs. It only has to do with the final map that's already been approved at the tentative map time. And I would like to add in there that the city engineer signs off on this as well.
Coming back as a sidebar, I want to remind fellow council members with the AB 1234 training that it may not be a good idea to be talking about sensitive matters such as that, because I don't know if that information was meant for public consumption yet. So I would just kind of adhere to the matters at hand before us.
Well, we pretty much made it public at our last council meeting, but I would disagree with council members Beener's way of describing that lawsuit.
Okay, Mr. Beener, you started a motion, but want a clarification.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you please repeat the motion?
I move that we pass this ordinance, but adding the language to it that the city engineer has to sign that map as well. Because our city engineer is the one with the most knowledge about maps in any city.
Okay, again, I want to clarify the motion. So the motion is to introduce ordinance 766, first reading, amending Chapter 16.36, final map of Title 16 of Patterson Municipal Code, PMC, with adding or substituting city engineer for planning director. I want clarification on
Yeah,
that.
that is correct.
Do you
Yes.
want in addition or to substitute?
Substitute.
So,
I also,
excuse me, Councilmember Free, there's a motion.
I'm speaking in reference to the motion. There was, by City Planner Andrews, one of the planning commissioners had recommended that they also add the chief of police and/or maybe
Actually, fire chief
fire chief.
and public works director.
And is that part of the motion?
Doesn't sound like it. And that was just the dissenting member, correct?
That's right.
Offered that suggestion?
Yes.
That was a suggestion. Okay, when they voted, was that in their vote, or that was a suggestion outside of it?
No, that was what was included. It was my impression that if that had been included, he would have voted for the ordinance.
Okay.
Well, I'll add the fire chief with that motion, along with the city engineer.
Okay.
Okay, so for clarification, is the sign off as the city manager, the fire chief, the
Engineer.
city engineer.
And the city engineer.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion by Councilmember Beener, second by Councilmember Farina. Any further discussion?
And I would just like to add, one of the, in reference to Councilmember Lustgarten and in what you're saying, and I can appreciate the sentiment, because this council, if you were to remember the five of us for anything up here, it has been the cleanup council. It has things that we have had to do up here have not been easy, and some of the decisions that we've had to make have not been easy. But we are in such an amazing time in this city that we have huge development knocking on our door, and it's opportunity to help the unemployment in this community, and it's time to help the sales tax revenue. So with that, and because of those, I'm in favor of this.
Any other comments?
I'm in agreement. We absolutely need to support jobs coming into town, but as our city council, our city attorney said, we're just talking about a matter of a couple of days, 2 or 3 days here. I don't think it makes that much difference.
Let me call the question. This requires a roll call. Councilmember Beener.
Aye.
Councilmember Farina.
Aye.
Councilmember Novelli.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Lustgarten.
No.
Mayor votes aye. That's a 4-1-0 vote.